All right, excellent. Thanks for attending, everybody. We try to make these webinars convenient and not too time consuming, but frequent and informative enough that we maintain a good and supportive administrative culture for the researchers in our college. So we appreciate you paying attention. Today's topic is effort reporting on funded research. And as maybe you know, this can be a kind of a complicated topic for a number of reasons, which we'll explore right now. Um, when it comes to effort on research grants, you hear a lot of different terms such as effort allocation, distribution, release time, course release, course buyout, FTE percentage, salary appointment, salary recovery, academic summer calendar, or person months. So the jargon alone is enough to drive a person insane, I think. Um, some of these concepts are more or less synonymous, and some are similar, and some are just quite different, actually. So as with everything else, good communication is the key. Um, Faculty, grants managers, SPOs, anyone in the mix here on grants should, we just need to make sure we know exactly what is being discussed and for what purpose. We'll take a closer look at a couple of these concepts later in the webinar because some are particularly relevant to EHE. I like to refer to the Office of Sponsored Programs website. Um, this is from their frequently asked questions page, and I like the use of the word nebulous here. I think that's a good description for the whole issue of effort reporting. Um, it's important to note that, as it states here, uh, we get pretty obsessed with counting time, I guess is what it comes down to, calculating time spent on different activities. And it kind of suggests that we have to be very precise, but that's not completely the case. It's recognized that it's difficult to, count time devoted to different tasks, and this blurb from OSP kind of captures that pretty well. It also quotes federal regulation, specifically. It is recognized in an academic setting that teaching, research, service, and administration are often inextricably intermingled, and we rely on estimates because it's just not always feasible to get a very precise calculation of time spent on different activities. So that is recognized and appreciated. This is from Harvard, also pretty much says the same thing, um, but just kind of like to look outside the university and see how other universities are kind of addressing the issue to make sure that what we're doing here at OSU makes sense. Today's topic specifically consists of, we're just going to define effort reporting. That's where we'll start. We're going to talk about why we have to do this, who we have to do it for, and some common challenges in calculating effort. So what is effort reporting? Simply put, it's a mechanism. Um, I found what I think is the best description courtesy of, again, Harvard, and I've added the emphasis. So I bolded some keywords that I think hammer home the fact that a research grant almost always comes with a time commitment on the part of the PI and their team. That time is being compensated by the sponsor, which obviously is an entity other than the individual's primary employer. So we all work at OSU. Everyone's on a research project. Not always the case, but the bulk of the research team is located at OSU, and someone other than OSU is going to pay to get this project done. So there needs to be a way to verify that time was spent. It's also codified in federal regulations, specifically Uniform Guidance 2 CFR 200 430 subpart E. That's a mouthful. Um, it comes down to internal controls, basically. So as we were kind of discussing on the last slide, institutions receive federal funds and they must have an appropriate internal control system to certify time spent on sponsored projects. So in a sense, effort reporting is simply a way of verifying for the sponsor, whether that's the federal, state, government, nonprofit, or even a for-profit. It's a way of verifying that they got what they paid for with regard to the time spent and commensurate salary charged to a grant. So it's a way of saying that not only was a project executed, but it was executed the way the recipient institution staff, as led by the PI, committed to doing so. Of course, if you have a federal requirement, there's the potential to be out of compliance with that requirement. Um, our university Office of Research uses a metric of 45 days to constitute noncompliance with effort reporting. That is 45 days after a semester. That's how we do it at OSU. I'm not sure exactly how other universities do it, but I think most large research universities use an after the fact verification system. So if you spent 20% of your full-time effort on a grant last fall, or this fall, I suppose, um, immediately after the close of the semester, you can verify or certify your time. Once you get 45 days after the end of that semester, it becomes a compliance concern. Um, this is a screenshot of the Office of Research, the way they um, kind of display uh, which colleges and cost centers have people that are out of compliance, specifically uncertified effort reports older than 45 days. I don't usually make too much of this information, but they even associate a dollar amount with the time spent that is currently sitting uncertified. So whose effort must I certify? And the I here is obviously we're referring to the faculty member, the PI. They must certify their own effort, obviously. All employees that have been paid on research funds are required to certify their effort on sponsored projects. Additionally, PIs.
We just lost your audio, Michael.
Thank you, Heather.
Yep.
Back up a little bit. So faculty have to certify their own effort, and then also for any students working on their projects, graduate, undergraduate, and postdoc researchers. You might have on a project, PI might have um, non-student staff such as um, research associates, program managers, program coordinators. Those individuals, they do certify their own time. So let's move on to some common challenges in calculating effort, tracking effort. Um, I started working in the college, the in EHE about 2.5 years ago. I came from the medical center, and everyone in the medical center is pretty much 12-month employees. So the 9-month adjustment and the need to get faculty on and off of projects when summer comes around, that's completely new to me. Um, and it is kind of a tricky issue. 20% of a 9-month appointment, for example, would constitute 1.8 person months, whereas on a 12-month appointment, 20% of a 12-month appointment is 2.4 months. And we'll get into the whole months jargon a little bit more in a couple slides, because that's how the federal government often asks us to track time. The off-duty period, it's related to the 9-month appointment. It can be a little tricky calculating effort in the off-duty period, but it does need to be tracked and reported to our sponsors. Sometimes PI might have multiple HR records. I mean, that's not all that unique, but sometimes they have multiple job records that carry compensation with them. So you may have to apply um, the, the effort to both job records in some cases. It's more of an issue in the medical center, but it does happen in other colleges too. Sometimes there's a need to increase or decrease time spent on a grant um, due to other duties. Perhaps the project isn't going as planned, or any number of other circumstances. A decrease in PI effort is probably, from the federal perspective, um, a little more complicated and something that we definitely want to get approved by the sponsor, especially if the decrease will be significant. An increase is the way the sponsors typically look at it. You work on the project as much as you need to get it done. What they really are concerned about are long-term absences or major decreases in whatever was proposed in the application. Hourly paid positions, those are usually like student assistants, undergrad students. Those can be tricky to calculate effort for because um, the hours are kind of all over the place in a given week or month. But a lot of our major sponsors do ask us to report effort on those positions, especially if they're going to be, um, if it will constitute throughout a calendar year at least one calendar month. Okay, sorry about that. So other challenges, there can be confusion around the issue of course buyouts. Um, when we got to really make sure we know what we're talking about. This issue has come up multiple times since I started working in the college. You get a course buyout. Is that just for a semester or is that for a full academic year? Um, Sometimes faculty might have effort on a grant without a course release. Typically, if you have effort on a grant, there's a course release, but it isn't always the case. It's also important to note the distinction between a course release and release time. A course release, it's kind of like a square rectangle relationship, I like to say. A course release is always constitutes release time, but release time doesn't necessarily constitute a course release. A PI can be released from another activity other than teaching, or the amount of effort they might have on a grant is so minimal um, that it doesn't constitute a major release of any of their activities. I think the best way that I can explain this issue to faculty when the confusion arises over effort is that being in the grants management field, and I would say the same goes for the Office of Sponsored Programs, we really are only concerned with maintaining the effort committed in the awarded proposal. How that's done over the course of 12 months is, you know, up to the PI and maybe might involve discussions with the chair. But like course releases, all of that kind of talk, it's a little more critical for the discussions between the PI and their duties, discussions with the chair. From a grants management perspective, we just need to make sure we are um, fulfilling the duty to the sponsor. And if we're not, that's fine. We just need to communicate that to the sponsor and get it approved. Um, this goes back to the issue of effort decreases. Um, on a 12-month basis, whatever level of effort was approved in the proposal, if the PI is going to decrease that by 25% or more, that is something that, from the federal grants perspective, would require a prior approval. So, sometimes you get the approval after the fact, and the federal sponsors are usually pretty forgiving of that. But we are actually supposed to clear that ahead of time. So the sooner a PI communicates effort decrease to their grants managers and OSP, the sooner we get it approved by the sponsor, and we're on our way. So here's just a shot of a typical spreadsheet for a proposal budget. Um, because of the 9-month uh, and off-duty period, we break it down into two different lines. Um, so 20% over a 9-month period um, is not all we need to report to the sponsor. If there's effort in the off-duty period, we have to roll it all up. We have to capture the annual perspective. So the federal agencies aren't exactly the end all be all, but we tend to default to their requirements for guidance and also just kind of as a starting point for all research related compliance issues. Um, but we do recognize that many sponsors have their own terms and conditions. Some are less stringent than the federal government. Some might be more so, especially if it's like a contract for hire. Sometimes they want to know every last minute the PI spends on a project. Typically, we don't get a lot of those awards. So we discuss these things from the purview of the federal agencies. This is um, this is what you see when it comes to NIH guidance, and the same goes for U.S. Department of Ed, NSF, all of the other federal agencies. Might be different from grant mechanism to grant mechanism, but for the most part, um, when you go to do your annual progress report, they want to know everybody. It doesn't matter how senior or how, um, you know, students, co-investigators, PIs, anyone that works on a sponsored project at least 1 month or 160 hours or 8.3% on an annual basis, they want that reported. So it can get pretty tricky, especially when you have large research teams and employing like a lot of part-time student staff. So resources, our office is always a resource when effort reporting issues come up. Um, the Office of Sponsored Programs is a good resource, the federal agency websites, and there's actually a grants manager training series that various grants managers from different colleges here at OSU, they do trainings uh, every month. I can get you a schedule if you're interested in attending those. There is a PowerPoint that I maintain and I refer to a lot that's on personnel appointments, just the bigger picture, not just PI effort and things like that, but just the whole the big picture regarding paying people from grants. So we have that. I can send that out to whoever might want it. I find it to be very helpful. um, Job aids also. I keep a couple of spreadsheets that are a great help in calculating effort. Um, I can take a look at those in a second. Here, here's one. This is very helpful. This is a conversion tool. So you can plop in the percent effort and it'll tell you what that equates to in terms of person months. Um, so let's say 50%. Obviously, that's pretty easy. On a 9-month basis, that's 4.5 months. Um, this is actually really helpful for calculating the off-duty effort as well. And then I also have another helpful spreadsheet. This is nice because it just allows you to enter effort percentages for a whole project team month by month, and you can factor in whether the person, like GRAs are often zero point 0.5 FTE, so that if they work 100% for 12 months um, on a project, that's 6 months, not 12. So, and then other people have FTEs all over the place. Some people have a 0.25 FTE. So when those progress reports are due, this is a sheet I use to list everybody working that 1 month or more that will need to be put in the federal progress report. That is just about all. We have about 5 minutes. We can take some questions. Um, Feel free to type them in if you'd like, or if I don't think anyone's using the headset, but if you have one, go for it. Looks like Belinda's typing a question, so just wait for that. We also will send out the a PDF of the slides for today's show, and as we mentioned, it's recorded, and we'll post that and send that out as well. All right, so Belinda says, when a grant is awarded, how do we let you know each person's FTE for effort certification? And what happens as the FTE changes from month to month, which happens with some staff on projects? I think I get the question. Um, it's a lot of referring to the proposal budget, um, and it that's why it's really important to have an accurate proposal budget. A lot of times you submit a proposal, you ask for X hundred thousands of dollars or whatever, and you have a detailed line item budget, for that amount, and then the sponsor funds your grant, but they cut the budget, and sometimes updating that line item budget to reflect the reduced amount kind of falls between the cracks. So it's critical to have an accurate budget, and it's critical to know who's appointed to your project. Um, a lot of times you can move people around. Um, the effort decreases and getting those approved when they become significant. That's mostly only regarding the PI, or there might be more than one PI on a grant, and then there might be some co-investigators who are critical to the execution of the project. It really is just a grant by grant thing, but typically you want to you got to track the effort decreases very closely for the PIs. Um, Student positions, GRAs, they can kind of come and go. They might have their coming and going might have implications to the budget, but in terms of getting approval from the sponsor to kind of shuffle people around, it's typically only necessary for the senior level investigators. All right, Belinda's got another question, so we'll just hang on, um, and then we can go a little beyond noon if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we'll let you know when the slides are ready and the recording is ready. Okay, Belinda asks, do we need any internal approval for staff FTE to change, or does the OSU payroll and effort certification align to make minor changes? Internal approval, that just happens via the HR system, the HR action system specifically. There's a workflow process. So when people are taken on and off of projects, that's, at the request of the investigator. Um, I guess that's probably a kind of, yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a workflow issue. Um, and again, if the guiding principle should be major changes to uh, senior faculty effort or PI effort. Um, those, I suppose, a second level of internal approval would be communicating that to OSP and getting them to interface with the sponsor to get that approved. Okay. Thank you, Belinda, and thanks everybody for coming. Um, Obviously, hit me up with any questions you have. It doesn't have to be in this forum. Just call, email, stop by if you have further questions or if you want any of the resources we discussed. Um, we will send out the PDF of the slides from the slideshow. And um, thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
Michael.